On June 21st, 2000, a gruesome discovery rocked the Calibri Bend apartments in Winter Park, Florida. Cats innocently playing with a human skull. It alerted residents to a dark secret. When the police arrived, their efforts brought them to a neighboring empty lot where they discovered additional skeletal remains and personal belongings, including clothing and a shocking weapon. Investigators were at a dead end. Then, without a name or any leads, the case turned cold. Secrets buried in an empty lot had turned into a terrifying crime scene. Will they ever find out who this unfortunate soul was? And what was the chilling weapon they found at the scene? On June 21st, 2000, a strange and horrific incident occurred at the Calibri Bend apartments in Winter Park, Florida. One of the residents saw two cats playing with an odd object that morning. The shocking truth became apparent upon a closer look. It was a human skull. The Orange County Sheriff's Office responded right away to this concerning discovery. Detectives and deputies taped off the area so they could search it thoroughly. Then their search brought them to a deserted lot close to the flats where they found additional half-buried skeletal remains and personal belongings. Among these were clothes and the most surprising piece of evidence, a small caliber handgun, and it laid there near the corpse. Then came the most important step, forensic analysis and an autopsy. The remains were examined by forensic anthropologists. Their conclusions were unsettling. The bones belonged to a Caucasian man who was thought to be in his 40s or 60s. The remains state indicated they had been there for perhaps 7 or 8 years. What was even more unsettling was the cause of death, a gunshot wound to the head, as evidenced by the skull hole. Doctors in forensics were positive the man had been shot. The lack of victimology or the study of victim profiles hampered the inquiry despite the investigators' best efforts. The case eventually became cold for lack of identification or a clear point of entry. Not only did bones surface from an unmarked burial, but also a few important pieces of evidence like the small caliber gun. Who was he, and why was he shot? The Orange County Sheriff's Office's investigation into the remains discovered at Calibri Bend apartments swiftly became a comprehensive examination. The detectives had a puzzle to put together with limited parts at their disposal. A small caliber gun found next to the remains provided a possible hint, but it also left more questions than answers. Who was the owner of the gun? It was an intimidating task for the forensic team who examined the objects discovered at the scene, as well as the skeletal remains with care. The location of the bones, the existence of the gun, and every article of clothing were all carefully recorded and examined. The investigation was, however, severely hindered by the time passed since death and the lack of immediate identification. No distinguishing features for the unfortunate murder victim surfaced, despite the law enforcement's efforts' best attempts. He was solely known as John Doe, and all available information about him was added to the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NamUs, with the case number UP528. The case proved to be extremely difficult for detectives to solve because the man's identification was unknown and the investigation was a dead end. Finally, after being cold for 22 years, the case started warming up. An important turning point in the long-running mystery surrounding the John Doe case occurred in August of 2022. The Sheriff's Department of Orange County made the decision to work together with Othram, a state-of-the-art forensic laboratory situated in the Woodlands, Texas. The goal of the collaboration was to revitalize this cold case by utilizing the most recent developments in DNA technology. By creating a DNA extract from a partial subsampling of the skeletal bones found back in 2000, Othram's team made a significant advancement. With the use of their exclusive forensic-grade genome sequencing, they created an extensive DNA profile for the missing guy. This profile held the key to perhaps revealing the victim's identity, making it more than just a scientific discovery. Othram's internal genealogy team started an intense process of forensic genetic genealogy after obtaining a full DNA profile. With the use of DNA analysis, and both public and commercial genealogical databases, this technique can be used to track down family ancestors and possibly even identify the deceased person's relatives. Based on the DNA profile, the genealogist's efforts paid off as they generated fresh leads for further investigation. Law enforcement received these leads right away and launched a follow-up investigation. This was a critical stage because the detectives now had clear directions to follow, which might have led them to the unidentified man's family. In order to gather more DNA samples for critical confirmation testing, the follow-up inquiry involved reaching out to possible relatives. This sensitive stage needed to be handled with caution because it involves contacting people who might not be aware of their relationship to an old mystery. The unnamed male was finally formally identified by the investigators following extensive confirmation DNA testing. Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau, Jr. was identified as the individual to whom the skeletal remains belonged. This discovery meant more than just putting a name to rest. It was the first move towards giving a family who had probably been missing a loved one without even knowing where he was or what had happened to him some closure. On October 29, 1951, Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau, Jr. was born, known to those close to him as Larry with affection. Larry was about 40 years old when he met his tragic end. Forensic discoveries only revealed this information decades later. Larry's early life took place in a nearby area of the region off the corner of University and Goldenrod in Orange County, which is also the location where his bones were later found. His family had a 12-acre farm that included this spot. He grew up in a neighborhood he knew well throughout his childhood, where he attended Colonial High School. Known as a smooth talker, according to Orange County Homicide Detective Scott Lowen, Larry was known as a charming and outgoing individual, rather than as a dangerous guy. Still, there were complications in his life. Due to his run-ins with the police and multiple arrests, some family members speculated that he may have served time in prison. They sadly lost sight of him as a result of this assumption, leading many to believe he was imprisoned and hiding the true cause of his death. Larry disappeared in the early 1990s, and while his absence was noticed, its cause remained unknown. The lack of information and the presumption of his imprisonment complicated the family's search. There were only pictures of Larry from his high school years and from when he was a baby. However, there were no recent images to aid in a more current search. The already difficult task of determining his whereabouts or fate was made more difficult by the absence of visual documentation. Fortunately, in the year 2024, there was news of the Larry case being solved. Identifying Paul Lawrence Larry Rougeau Jr. brought long-awaited closure to his family after years of uncertainty. But the journey was far from done for the homicide investigators assigned to his investigation. Now that time had passed, the puzzle of piecing together the events leading to Larry's unexpected demise had become even more difficult. Leading detective Scott Lowen describes the difficulties they face, saying, "People die, move away, and other things happen. So it is a difficulty when you start working a case that has been going on for this long. All we're asking is for anyone who knows him to get in touch with us and provide details so we can get things going." It's evident that someone has information about Larry's friends, regular spots, or way of life, and they are encouraged to come forward. Collaboration among the community is essential. Even seemingly insignificant or disconnected information may hold the key to advancing the investigation. The Central Florida Crime Line has enabled anyone to report information anonymously by phoning 800-423-TIPS or 8477.